各位觀眾大家好，歡迎收睇26分鐘見證實錄。喺去年，網絡世界出現咗一個名為 ChatGPT 嘅軟件工具，唔少民眾以及公司團體都被呢一個軟件吸引住。ChatGPT 更加一度成為搜尋器嘅熱門字句。呢一個軟件工具亦都令到好多嘅民眾對人工智能產生好奇。有調查就發現本國嘅民眾當中每4個人就有1個曾經使用過人工智能，而使用呢啲新興科技嘅人更加有年輕化嘅趨勢，吸引咗唔少初創企業以及創科企業運用人工智能引入到佢哋嘅商業運作。咁到底人工智能係點樣幫助到佢哋嘅日常運作呢？而運用期間又會遇到啲乜嘢嘅挑戰呢？
If there was no AI or if there was no neural networks, how would that work? It would be a lot more challenging to teach different waste objects just as a database of like, hey, just traditional mechanisms of computer vision without neural networks would be extremely challenging.
It became really popular sort of last year when ChatGPT came out. But before that, it's been very common to us. So the translation on Google Translate is built on the same technology that these chatbots are doing. So it's been around for a while in lots of different forms.
有調查研究發現，本國國民平均生產嘅垃圾多於地球上任何其他國家，每年大約有3100萬噸垃圾喺本國生產，而當中就只有30%嘅垃圾會被回收利用。Fairchild 喺大約6年前同佢嘅朋友喺卑詩省創立一個廢物回收網站，引入人工智能，俾用家可以喺佢哋嘅軟件上揾到最近嘅回收資源站，投放可回收垃圾。
We basically started Intuitive AI, I think almost 6.5 years ago, so 2017. And the main purpose of starting Intuitive for us was to contribute our knowledge and our learnings to minimize the amount of waste that goes to landfill, right? So originally my family comes from India, Hassan's family originally comes from Pakistan. Both of us grew up in Dubai together, like in the same city. And we met in university here. And both of us understood and saw how big the waste problem was back in India and Pakistan, right? And when we looked into it a little bit more, we realized that a lot of the waste was generated in those countries, but a lot of it was actually shipped from here or from other developed nations to these places where, and then dumped there, right? So there's a lot of that happens as well. There's no reason why we should be doing that because we have the infrastructure here to recycle, to upcycle, to keep using the materials within our economy.
Fairchild 話佢哋一直都使用人工智能，而最近 ChatGPT 嘅興起，令大家都不停討論呢一個話題，甚至接觸到呢一個話題。
From the beginning, our core technology is based in neural networks and machine learning. So we've always used AI. I guess the way that I would answer that question is if there was no AI or if there was no neural networks, how would that work? It would be a lot more challenging to teach different waste objects just as a database of like, hey, just traditional mechanisms of computer vision without neural networks would be extremely challenging to learn and recognize waste items that are so many. And the challenge with waste items is there's hundreds and thousands of objects, right? Anything can be a waste item, from a little, straw to a cup to anything, right? So you need to build something that is able to identify anything across the board. And doing that without neural networks would be almost impossible.
喺今年夏季 ，Fairchild 同佢嘅團隊研發出一個名為 Oscar Pocket 人工智能應用程式，俾用家能夠透過呢一個程式去揾到佢哋所在地最近嘅資源回收站。佢話創立之後，用戶反應良好。
Oscar Pocket is basically a web application, mobile application if you want to call it, an app really. And what it does is it basically democratizes the information with what goes where. I think that's the biggest issue. The Oscar Sort, which is our main flagship product, is in a lot of commercial settings, restaurants like Tim Hortons and airports and malls and a lot of public-facing locations. But what ends up happening is, great, so when you're in these public-facing commercial locations, you have a way, you can go to the Oscar, show your item, Oscar will tell you what bin to put it in on its screen. When you go home, sometimes people are confused of what to do with their waste items, right? And so the Oscar Pocket was built with the intention that you can still have all the information, all the learnings of an Oscar, but in your phone. And that way, all you have to do is just ask a question of like, hey, where does my coffee cup go? And it will know that you are in Vancouver, and it will give you the most appropriate answer of where to put that coffee cup, right? And so that's really what it is. The Oscar Pocket is essentially a chatbot style application that you can just ask a question and it'll give you an answer. And it's based on a lot of the information from the Oscar sort, but it's intended to democratize that and keep that in your pocket. So yeah, basically this is the Pocket. You can set it up for your city. You just have to select your city and then you can begin. I have it selected to Vancouver, right? And the whole idea here is I can ask any question that I want about my waste and it would, give me the feedback. So, for example, we can ask a question of like, where should I dispose of my food scraps, right? It's a pretty basic thing, and most people would want to know this kind of a question. So it basically will go through the processing it does, and then it just goes ahead and answers you, right? So you can dispose your food scraps in the green bin for curbside pickup in Vancouver, and then it goes ahead and gives you more detail, like food waste such as fruit peelings, eggshell, or processed foods can be placed in the green bin, along with soiled paper. So, that just means like products like pizza boxes and paper compost liners. So it's designed to give you a little bit more detail. So you're actually able to get an understanding of not only the question you ask, but also anything around it. You can ask another question, where do I dispose my batteries? This is another important one. And, it's going to basically think again, and it's going to come up with, there we go. So you can drop your batteries off at a special waste facility or contract local recycling company. So note how it mentioned to you to not dispose batteries in your waste, right? Because it is hazardous. And so it basically guided you to, contacting the waste facilities if you're going to dispose your batteries off. It would basically take the rules for that city. So I can even go to Berlin, Germany, for example, and then I can ask a question and it would answer in that city, right? So depending upon, and this is again one of those repositories that's always growing. So we're always adding cities and municipalities. So as we add the cities and municipalities, it would, you would be able to select your exact city and then have it run for you, right? So when we're launching it right now as well, we're launching it by city, so that we're getting people to start using it, getting the type of questions that people are asking, and then making it better and improving it. I think the main one is just understanding the rules for the city, because each city has different rules for recycling. Each city has different infrastructure for how they deal with their waste. And so the challenge is mostly just first getting a sense of what is it that the city does with their waste, and then teaching Pocket basically, so that it can help people.
Vivek 話：雖然公司運用人工智能，但係仍然有唔少挑戰存在，數據每日仍然千變萬化。
You definitely have to, it's a constant effort to keep on trying to improve your neural network, right? So, like I mentioned, because waste is such a diverse topic, it's not like there's only 10 items that are waste. There's hundreds and thousands of items that are waste objects. So, the constant challenge is, how do you basically learn to identify different waste items without seeing it? Once you see a waste item a few times, of course, it's much easier. But if you're going into a new country, or if you're going into a new city, how do you know what waste items you're going to get there, right? So there's always a challenge of like anticipating that, training your system, constantly improving it, fine-tuning it. So it's a lot of effort to make sure that your system is on top of the waste items within a particular area. And it's an ongoing thing. It's not something that you stop. You have to keep teaching it so that it can stay up to date.
喺舊年，人工智能 ChatGPT 嘅興起浪潮席捲全球多個地方。不過同時間有唔少人都對人工智能一知半解，有人更認為 ChatGPT 就等於人工智能嘅全部。究竟兩者有啲咩分別呢？
So ChatGPT is using this lots of data to make predictions about what's true. But the other part of doing actions in the world is you have to work out what it is you want. So it's actually very poor now at finding out what it is that people want. It just gives one size fits all, and it's going to tell you the same thing. Well, it makes up things at random, so it's not going to ask what your preferences are. I like to give an example as if you have sometimes you have to make a choice when you do medical procedures. It's not just, and you've got to choose whose preferences do you use. So you've got to take into account preferences, how much life expectancy do people have, how much do people want how much pain are they prepared to live with to live longer. And you've got to work out whose preferences they are, whether they're preferences of the people who's paying, the preferences of society, the preference of the doctor, or the preferences of the patient. And at the moment, people aren't asking the patient what it is that they want. So that half of it is not really well developed. What's well developed is the cases where there is lots and lots of data. If there's lots and lots of data, we can build good predictive engines.
卑斯大學電腦科學系教授 David Poole 又話，其實人工智能從來都冇離開過我哋，人類嘅日常生活都同人工智能息息相關。
So for example, if you have a smart watch that predicts what activity you're doing, that's using AI to work out, to try to predict what it is that you're doing from your movements of your wrist and your heartbeat. So if you do that, then all of that's part of AI. A lot of the people who are doing smarter medical diagnosis is using AI for that. So there's a lot of work on systems that help people interpret medical images, for example, is AI. There's lots of different aspects that are going on inside computers. I mean, in some sense, that's what Google is really a big AI. They're trying to predict what it is that you want from when you type in a Google query and it tries to find the best web pages. They used to be very simple things, but now they've got much more sophisticated.
人工智能一直同我哋嘅日常生活息息相關，咁基本上每一日我哋或多或少都會接觸到人工智能。咁甚至現時有唔少嘅學府都准許學生使用人工智能。不過過分咁依賴呢一啲嘅新興技術，會帶俾我哋啲乜嘢問題啦？我哋下一次翻嚟再睇。歡迎翻嚟節目時間。人工智能呢一啲新興科技發展速度越嚟越快，用途亦都漸漸變得廣泛。咁但係正因為咁，有唔少嘅用家用錯方式去運用呢一啲嘅科技，導致唔為意咁誤墮法網。而人工智能又會否衍生出法律嘅爭議呢？
卑斯大學護理學院助理教授洪莉莉同佢嘅研究團隊較早之前展開一項研究，探討人工智能機械人點樣陪伴長者紓解佢哋嘅孤獨情緒。洪莉莉話：呢兩隻喺日本借翻嚟嘅機械人 Kiwi 同埋 Mango 喺當地都好受歡迎。
咁我想睇下，究竟喺日本咁受歡迎，日本人咁中意呢類型嘅機械人，咁究竟加拿大人會唔會接受同樣嘅機械人呢？咁呢啲機械人咧，佢又唔同你做 housework 又唔同你吸塵，又唔同你洗碗，咩都唔做嘅，淨係咧喺屋企咧就好似你隻貓仔咁樣陪你啦，跟住你啦，要你氹佢開心啦。咁我諗下，究竟加拿大人接唔接受呢隻 robot 咧？咁如果有呢隻 robot 嘅話咧，譬如對老人家咁，嗰啲老人家覺得有冇用咧？咁所以我哋做呢個咁嘅研究就希望問下啲老人家啦，喺加拿大，因為我哋加拿大都係好多元文化係咪？唔同類型嘅人咁樣，我哋去過好多社區中心喺呢度 Amica 同唔同嘅人傾偈，咁覺得俾佢睇下隻機械人啦，咁睇下佢覺得一隻咁嘅機械人，咁有冇用咧？咁嚇。
洪莉莉話：呢一隻機械人特別適用喺一啲獨居長者或者仲有認知障礙嘅人士身上，陪伴佢哋左右。
因為咧，呢 啲咁個機械人咧係唔需要即係你唔需要學佢，冇一啲都唔複雜嘅，好容易用嚇。你見到佢嗰陣時，你可以開始咁樣佢同佢玩，佢陪你玩，佢樣樣都係自動嘅。佢自動咁樣，如果攰咧就自動翻去嗰個charger 個 nest 嗰度咧，就自己插電，插完電插滿出嚟咁啊，哇嚇伸個懶腰咁樣就走翻出嚟啦，咁啊同你玩。咁啊，完全唔需要照顧，即係唔使帶佢出去咁樣嚟又唔需要點樣，唔驚佢話會病咁樣，所以咧就特別方便啦，係嘛？因為你知啦，如果老人家咁，如果佢要佢自己要照顧另外一隻寵物嘅話咧，其實老人家就好中意寵物嘅，因為陪伴佢啊嘛，係咪氹佢開心啊嘛，係嘛？但係如果隻寵物又需要照顧嘅話咧，佢未必能夠照顧得到。但係呢啲咁樣嘅寵物機械人咧，就好容易用，咁樣變咗氹得老人家好開心嚇。
機械人能夠透過頭頂嘅攝影機同埋內置電腦程式，作人面同埋人聲識別，認識主人。喺同長者互動嘅時候，會發出唔同嘅聲音，亦都有肢體動作。
佢但係有好多咁嘅情緒咁樣 expression 啊，譬如好開心啊，或者有少少驚啊，又或者要你錫佢啊，好嗲啊，好似屋企隻貓仔嗰啲咁嘅情緒啦嚇。咁啊，佢有呢個360嘅 camera 咁啊，佢有認得個主人嘅 facial recognition， 咁啊有 sound recognition 啊，咁啊認得你係佢嘅主人。如果有人入咗去間屋度，有個賊入去間屋度，嗰個佢認得唔係主人嘅話，佢即刻影一張相 send 俾你，咁啊可以報警嘅。咁佢其實可以 house monitoring 都得嘅。
人工智能除咗為一啲公司引進新嘅科技，亦都方便網民使用。有人會用嚟做功課，亦都有人會用嚟做文書嘅工作。例如有唔少公司運用人工智能 ChatGPT 去處理一啲嘅法律文件。不過有刑事法律師擔心誤用人工智能將會帶嚟不良效果。
I'm concerned as a criminal lawyer about the prevalence of AI and the speed with which people are using it. Certainly, there are lots of really good reasons to use AI. It can make people's work more efficient, it can help check for errors, it can do mathematical calculations that are maybe difficult to do, but it can also be used for a lot of mischief, and especially in cases of frauds. In the criminal law, we often see individuals impersonating other people or impersonating a person of power through emails. And with AI, you can now use technology to mimic somebody's voice, to make a video to look like somebody, and that could be used potentially to defraud innocent people and put people at risk.
Tyler 指出，雖然人工智能嘅存在確實有好大嘅威脅，但佢唔擔心人工智能能夠取代佢嘅職業。
I'm not that concerned that AI is going to eliminate the role of lawyers. There are lots of ways in which AI can be used to make the job of lawyers more efficient or more effective, but at the same time, the law is ever-changing. So we're often seeing court decisions that change the way that things are done, new legislation passed, and an AI is going to have to relearn and update for every single one of those every time it happens. And that would be very difficult for AI to do as quickly as a lawyer with a specialization in an area can do. In addition, a lot of the law is less about the black and white and more about the humanity. Especially when it comes to criminal law, you're dealing with people who have mental health issues, who have drug addiction, alcohol addiction, people who've had horrible things happen to them in their lives. And you need to be able to know how to deal with that client in a human way, as well as tell their story and relay their information with feeling. And that's something that AI just isn't capable of doing.
依漆黑裏仍然哼唱，仍然大聲高唱。
隨住人工智能科技不斷變遷，從文字處理去到近期喺一啲地方，有網民開始利用人工智能將一個人嘅聲音複製落其他用處。Kyler 話呢一個情況令法律體系受到一啲嘅挑戰。
We've already seen deepfake technology be used in a way in Canada that is potentially criminal. For example, some reporters with the CBC were found to have had their images and their voices and their likenesses deep-faked to try and sell products that were ultimately about ripping people off. And so when deepfake technology is used, it can be used for fraudulent purposes. This is another challenge that the legal system is going to have to face, is being able to differentiate between something that's filed in court, a video, a document, a photograph that's accurate, versus one that's been generated by AI. And right now, there's not really much of a mechanism for the court to be able to do that and to answer the questions that arise when somebody is saying that photo or that video doesn't depict me.
Kyler 話：人工智能發展迅速，使用率亦都非常普遍，以致有人誤用人工智能，最有可能會誤墮法網。
From a legal perspective, my biggest concern is that somebody who is not a lawyer is going to rely on AI to do the work of a lawyer and either use AI to defraud people by taking their money and producing legal documents for them that are not accurate because they've been generated by AI, or alternatively, in representing themselves, rely on inaccurate information and inaccurate documents generated by AI that ultimately compromises their case. So I worry about the fairness, especially to people who don't have the protection of having that additional layer of a lawyer looking over the work. I mean, AI systems could potentially be charged based on who owns them. There are mechanisms in Canada for the owners of companies who allow their companies to act in a negligent way or their products to be negligently used to be liable as a result of the negligence of those companies. And under the criminal code, if a corporation acts in a way that is criminal, if it violates the criminal law, the corporation itself can be charged, because in the law, we presume that a company is a person. Unfortunately, when it comes to AI, a lot of these companies are not based in Canada. They're based overseas, they're based in the United States, and so we get into really complicated issues of where charges should be brought against those companies and what country's law actually applies to any disputes involved in the work that's been done by those companies.
除咗法律管轄權執行問題之外，卡尼都憂慮每當人工智能可能涉及刑事罪行，都難以定下責任誰屬。
I think for right now, the best answer is to make the person who is generating something with AI responsible for the content. Because if you're putting your trust and faith in an AI system to do something that could have significant legal or other implications for a person, you owe it to the person you're acting for to make sure that you are exercising due diligence and ensuring that the information that the AI generates is truthful and accurate. And I think that that's the simplest way to do it until we have some regulations in place from the federal government related to the use of this technology. Well, I think that our legal system already has a mechanism to deal with something where somebody takes steps to produce a document or create information, they honestly believe it's accurate, they take steps to verify that the information they've provided is accurate, but they were just wrong. That is a defense in criminal law that may rise to something called due diligence, and it's also a defense in civil law if you take reasonable steps to avoid something from happening and you demonstrate that you weren't negligent.
究竟當局係咪應該為使用人工智能定下一啲嘅使用守則嚟堵塞法律漏洞？卑斯大學電腦科學系教授 David Poore 認為聯邦政府應該做一啲嘢，但係而家就睇唔到有任何跟進。
I think the government has to do something. At the moment, they're sort of not doing anything. So it's a problem that we need to do, I believe, worldwide, of getting people to agree on what you can and can't do, what regulations there are, how you have to be safe, safety, particularly if you're using it in a self-driving car, for example. You need to be safe. You need to have rules about that. You need to make sure that there are lots of rules. So but you've got to have people who are both knowledgeable, but there's something called regulatory capture, which is about saying that, that when the big companies start lobbying the government to make it so that it's good for them, not necessarily good for everyone else.
律師 Keller Lee 就期望聯邦政府如果着手開始立法程序之前，應該諮詢唔同持份者意見，以制定出利益平衡嘅政策。
When government is considering drafting legislation that deals with AI, they need to have people who actually create and use AI involved in the consultations as they're building the legislation. And when they table the legislation, the government should be holding extensive committee hearings, hearing from all of the interested stakeholders across all industries to make sure that they have a full picture of the way that AI can impact technology, because otherwise they run the risk of passing legislation that is either going to frustrate Canada's ability to access AI technology for all of the good that it can be used for, or pass legislation that's going to be tying up the courts with constitutional challenges.
好啦，今集嘅節目時間就差唔多啦。咁如果觀眾對我哋嘅節目有啲乜嘢意見嘅話，係好歡迎大家以電郵嘅方式同我哋聯絡㗎。我哋嘅電郵地址係 mag26@fairchildtv.com。如果觀眾咧想上網重溫翻今集嘅節目，亦都可以上到去我哋嘅網站3w.fairchildtv.com， 點擊節目重溫一欄就可以睇得翻㗎啦。下星期同樣時間再同大家見面，晚安。